I'm very excited to be here. I'm excited to be able to share what my study means to the people of South Africa. I'm super relieved that I am done with my master's now. And though I love learning and love researching, I think I'm going to put further studies on the back burner for the time being. I think I need a little bit of a break, but watch this space. I'm pretty sure in the next year or two, I'm going to be studying something else. I just can't help myself. So just a little bit of background into the aim of this study is that diabetes, we know, is a growing problem. It's growing worldwide. And type 2 diabetes accounts for 95% of cases of diabetes. And this is largely due to lifestyle-related issues. In South Africa, the type 2 diabetes epidemic is occurring alongside HIV/AIDS and TB. And this places immense strain on the public healthcare system, which we know services 80% of the South African population.
Yeah.
Of these people, 45% of the estimated cases of type 2 diabetes are undiagnosed. So they don't even know that they have the condition.
Mm.
And high blood glucose levels over an extended period of time causes damage to the organs and all your body parts. So it's not ideal to have these high glucose levels. And usually these people, or very often these people, are only diagnosed when complications present, and this negatively impacts the outcomes and their quality of life. It's also really costly. So the direct cost of managing type 2 diabetes amounted to over 2.7 billion rand in 2018. And most of this cost was related to treating complications. So ideally, we want to be able to diagnose people early on and manage diabetes appropriately. And because South Africa is resource poor, we can't just, administer a blood test to everyone. We sort of have to be circumspect as to who we select. And in this regard, we can use a diabetes risk score, which calculates the risk that person is of having diabetes based on a number of variables such as age, waist circumference, BMI, tallies their score, and then indicates whether they're at high risk or not at high risk. And then if they are at high risk, it encourages them to go get blood tests done to confirm whether they have diabetes or not. It's very important to differentiate between the types of diabetes. The main types that we get are type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. And understanding their root cause or their pathophysiological process helps us to understand their treatment. So for example, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder where the immune system attacks and kills the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. So this is why people with type 1 diabetes require exogenous, so external insulin, which they have to inject, and they have to use that for life. On the other hand, type 2 diabetes is the result of a complex interplay between genetics and the environment, where a genetic predisposition in the face of a poor lifestyle that results in excess body fat may lead to the development of insulin resistance and possible simultaneous impairment in insulin production. Though there is a little bit of insulin there. Well, there is insulin. So this is why type 2 diabetes can be managed with lifestyle and oral medication. I think for those of you who are a little bit more interested in how cutoffs are developed, how we diagnose certain things, they should delve into the science of how this was done, because it is incredibly fascinating where we get it from. But basically, diabetes is diagnosed using 3 different blood tests, and a cutoff is applied for each of these. So we get a fasting glucose, where you fast for a minimum of 8 hours, and then you go and get a blood test done, and then they measure your glucose levels. And if your glucose levels are above the cutoff of 7 millimoles per liter, that's diagnostic.
Okay.
Then you get an oral glucose tolerance test, which is probably the gold standard when it comes to diagnosing diabetes. Here you have to fast, similar to the fasting glucose. They take the baseline measurement, and then then you take 75 grams of glucose in water, and after 2 hours they measure your glucose levels or your blood sugar levels again, and if it exceeds 11.1 millimoles per liter, that is diagnostic. And then we get the third test, which is glycated hemoglobin, or HbA1c, which is a long-term measure of your average glucose levels. So this is a measurement over about 3 months, and it comes with a percentage. So if it exceeds 6.5%, that is also diagnostic. So oral glucose tolerance tests and fasting glucose have been used for decades. Everybody has accepted these are measurements that we can do to diagnose it, whereas HbA1c is only relatively recently being used or accepted as a measure or a diagnostic measure. And it's under very strict conditions that they actually accept that. And you actually need to present with diabetes symptoms and one high measurement to be diagnosed with diabetes, or you need 2 high measurements within a 2-week period. So you can't just take one measurement and have no symptoms and say, okay, I have diabetes. You need to have at least 2 measurements within a 2-week period. And that's how diabetes is diagnosed. Say about between 3.9 and 5.5 millimoles per liter is considered a good fasting glucose range. So definitely not. Every person is different, and some people with type 2 diabetes might progress to require insulin, whereas others can continue with lifestyle modification and oral medication indefinitely. And for those who do progress to require insulin, it might just be a natural progression of the condition. So it's not necessarily a failure on their part that they didn't manage their diabetes properly. It might just be, naturally how things would be progressing. Yes. So this is what makes me so passionate about this, is that we can do something about it. So diabetes, type 2 diabetes can be prevented. And this has been shown by several landmark trials, particularly the Diabetes Prevention Program, which showed that lifestyle changes and even the use of metformin help to prevent the onset of type 2 diabetes. And it was actually shown in that trial that lifestyle changes are more important, or they have a greater effect than metformin in terms of preventing the onset of type 2 diabetes. So this is why it's so important to implement lifestyle changes. Then type 2 diabetes can be put into remission. And it's very important to highlight here that the use of reversible or curable is incorrect. We like to use the term remission because, similarly to cancer, if it's not managed properly, it can recur. So it's very important to bear that in mind, that when you're making the changes, it has to be lifelong because, diabetes can return. So the way to achieve remission is through large and rapid weight loss, so about 15 kilos, or an intensive lifestyle intervention that results in 15 kilos of weight loss. And this can be achieved through various different methods, including a very low calorie diet. And it can also be achieved through surgery. So there's the lifestyle aspect, dietary and lifestyle, and then through surgery, such as bariatric surgery. And what's really cool about that is remission has been seen in people even before weight loss occurs, which means something else is going on in the physiology resulting in the diabetes remission that's not actually related to weight loss. So I find that quite intriguing. And another thing is that remission is more likely to occur when lifestyle changes are implemented earlier in the stages of the disease. So particularly if you, like within 6 years of diagnosis, if you implement lifestyle changes, the chances of achieving remission are much higher. However, it shouldn't be, even if someone doesn't achieve remission, there's still loads of benefits, such as decreasing the amount of blood pressure medication you need, or perhaps the glucose medication that you need. So even if you don't achieve remission, there's still so many benefits. And basically what I want to say is work closely with your healthcare professional team, because it is definitely always a team approach, and you can prevent and you can put into remission. And this is why it's so important to know your risk. If you know your risk, then you can be proactive about your health. I did do a postgraduate diploma in diabetes. In fact, it even started in my community service. I was based in rural KwaZulu-Natal, and I was horrified with how people with diabetes were being managed, or how they were managing their own condition, and how some people were coming in having further and further amputations. So I realized I also didn't know enough about this condition to be able to really help people. Obviously, the language barrier wasn't helping me, but I decided to pursue this a bit further. So I did several things, like I did the 5-day CDE course, and then I did my postgraduate diploma through the University of South Wales, and then I worked for the CDE. So I've been involved with diabetes, and I'm really passionate about the topic. And I think what really drives me is the fact that it is preventable and it can be put into remission. You just need to make appropriate lifestyle changes, and this will come forward. So as I said, to prevent or to manage, you have to know that you have the disease. And the fact that there's 45% of people out there who don't even know they have it, how can you do anything about it? So there are, as I mentioned, these risk scores that people can use to identify whether they're high risk or not. And there are many, but a lot of them have been developed in white populations, and the population it's been developed in largely affects how it performs. So we can't necessarily take something that was developed in Finland and apply it to South Africa, because there's different factors at play and we don't know how well it's going to perform. So as I said, it's not necessarily easily generalizable, and they need to be validated. And validation entails making sure that score performs appropriately in the target population. So I searched around and I didn't see anything that was developed in the sub-Saharan African population, and I saw the need, and I really wanted to develop my own risk score. So this is a really large task, definitely a PhD level, and I quickly learned it's not going to be what I'm going to be doing. And I also discovered that a risk score was developed in an African setting. So it was just never published, which is really unfortunate. But it is currently being used by the South African Medical Research Council. Amazing. And it's very effective. So basically it was developed in 3 African populations and then validated in 3 African populations. And 2 of those populations were in South Africa. So one was in Cape Town and one was in KZN. So we know that it performs well in those Black populations in South Africa. But ethnicity may also affect the performance. So what I wanted to do was to select another Black population and make sure that we could also apply to that. So I applied it to the pure population, or the pure sample that's in Northwest, and I wanted to see how it fared in that setting.
Amazing.
To validate a score, you have to compare it with a diagnostic measure. So this is usually being an OGTT, or the oral glucose tolerance test, or fasting glucose. And this compares how well that score predicts whether someone actually has the condition or not. So that is what I did in the pure sample, is I applied this African diabetes risk score to that sample. And I also compared it to 3 other risk prediction models that were developed in completely different populations. So a Finnish population, an Indian population, and the American population. And I wanted to see how do these scores compare to the African diabetes, or the ADRS, African diabetes risk score. And a unique aspect of this study was I not only used fasting glucose, but I also used HbA1c to see, if there's any difference, if I can use HbA1c as the diagnostic measure. And to my knowledge, I don't think anyone else has done this as yet. And so that's a really novel aspect about this study, which I'm quite proud of. And we found that all of the models performed comparably.
Wow.
And that HbA1c performed comparably to fasting glucose, which is really cool. And the fact that the ADRS only uses 3 variables, which is age, waist circumference, and your blood pressure, it makes it very easy to use, because these are measurements that we should have. I mean, someone should know their blood pressure at some point in their life. We already know how old we are, hopefully. And waist circumference is relatively easy to measure. And that's why, because it performs very similarly to all the other models, we recommended that the ADRS can be used in the Black population in South Africa, because we've covered various different demographics. We've got a population from Cape Town, a population from KZN, and now one in Northwest. So we're quite comfortable with the fact that it does perform well in most Black South Africans. So Black South Africans make up 80% of the South African population, so that's a large chunk. And the ADRS allows them to be screened and determines whether, or makes sure that those who are at highest risk go for testing. So we're making sure that our scarce resources, our precious resources, are only allocated to those who are most likely to actually have the condition. However, we do know that the Indian and the colored population are really high at risk of having diabetes. So it's really important for this screening tool to be validated in those population groups as well, so that we can apply it to those who we already know are at really, really high risk. And the last thing is that HbA1c can potentially be used for future validation studies. And what's lovely is that this measure is far more convenient to collect, because you don't need to fast. So a lot of epidemiological studies actually collect HbA1c levels. And now we know that we can use data sets that have HbA1c in order to validate. We don't only have to use fasting glucose or the OGTT. So I'm sure it's important for other people to still check this, because I am aware that one of the limitations of the study was a lot of missing data, which made my sample size quite small. But I'm confident that in future they would be able to see similar results, and that HbA1c will be able to be used for future validation studies. Also, just wanted to highlight that because of my passion about diabetes, a large mission of M2Biome, which is the division that I'm head of, we plan to produce products and services that really help people with diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes. We're focusing on metabolic disorders and that sort of thing. So you can definitely watch this space. We're going to be bringing a whole bunch of exciting products to the market. So I'm really, really excited for that.
Yeah.